This is shown on the right side of the illustration. In the middle is a stormwater detention basin, sometimes constructed by the flood control district. When storm sewers on the left are increased, this creates an increase in runoff. Since it is our policy to avoid impacts to properties downstream, detention basins help to safely take in and temporarily store excess stormwater during heavy rain events. Often, we partner with Harris County precincts, utility districts, and others to add recreational amenities such as trails to these basins and along our channels. On August 25th, 2018, Harris County voters approved $2.5 billion in funds for flood risk reduction projects. This vote followed a series of meetings across Harris County in each watershed, which resulted in a list of what is now 181 bond projects. As of August 25th, 2021, each project included in the 2018 bond program has been initiated, including all of the projects in the Greens Bayou watershed. A total of more than $1.35 billion in partnership funding has been secured so far to stretch the 2018 bond program even farther. The actual timing of each individual project will depend on a variety of factors, including environmental permitting, right-of-way acquisition, and utility relocation, and in some cases, requirements of a particular grant. That said, project lists and projected schedules are updated regularly and shown on our website. Each agency has its own definition of eligible projects and its own requirements for local match funding. So the Flood Control District works diligently to match projects to the right partnership opportunities. While the bond was for $2.5 billion, the full cost of every project in the bond table is almost $5 billion. So we made it clear from the outset that we would need funding partners to fully construct the projects in the bond program. As I mentioned, we've had some success so far, having secured more than $1.35 billion in partnership funds. And this graphic illustrates the many sources of those partnerships, including federal, state, and local funding that the Flood Control District is working to secure for Harris County. We will now move into the part of the program that is specifically about tributaries P138-01-00 and P138-01-01 in the Greens Bayou Watershed Feasibility Study. The Greens Bayou Watershed encompasses portions of the city of Houston and Humboldt. The upper reach flows in an eastward direction, and the lower reach flows southward into the Houston Ship Channel. The watershed covers about 212 square miles and includes 4 primary streams: Greens Bayou, Garner's Bayou, Paul's Bayou, and Reinhardt Bayou. There are about 308 miles of open streams, including the primary streams and tributary channels. Flooding of homes and businesses along Greens Bayou and its tributaries has occurred numerous times in the last 2 decades, with devastating flood levels throughout the watershed brought on by Tropical Storm Allison in 2001 and Hurricane Harvey in 2017. High-density development combined with significant floodplains cause high damages during frequent flood events. Additionally, storm surges can influence flooding levels along the lower 10 miles of the watershed. As you can see on this map, we generally look at the Greens Bayou watershed in 3 sections: the upper, middle, and lower. The project we are here to discuss tonight is in the mid-reach area, which begins at Veterans Memorial Drive and stretches downstream to JFK Boulevard. We want to show you this exhibit to give you a general idea of all the projects underway in the watershed. The maintenance and capital projects, such as the one we are discussing tonight, are either complete or have been initiated, and planning is underway. Since 2000, the Flood Control District and our partner agencies have invested over $230 million in the Greens Bayou watershed. If you want to know more about any particular project, you can visit our website, www.hcfcd.org. On the homepage, there's an interactive map where you can zoom in and look closer at each project in the watershed and across Harris County. This exhibit shows the capital projects that were recently completed or are in progress within the Greens Bayou mid-reach, where this feasibility study is located. Our study area is located on the bottom right-hand corner of the exhibit near the Flood Control District's Lauder Stormwater Detention Basin and the Harris County Engineering Department's Subdivision Drainage Improvements projects in the Castlewood Addition Sections 3 and 4 and High Meadows subdivisions. Let's now look at the study area. It is located primarily west of JFK Boulevard and between Lauder Road and the Aldine Mill Route Road. Our evaluated area has a drainage area of just over 1 square mile and consists of approximately 1.76 miles of open channels. While every flood risk reduction project is unique, they all have a common life cycle. Each project begins and ends with common and predictable milestones along the way. Whether a project moves forward from one stage to the next and how quickly depends on how many factors, including the availability of funding, shifting community priorities, and other changing circumstances. Each of the stages in the project life cycle concludes with a final product. For example, the construction stage concludes with a built project. For the feasibility study stage, where we are right now with this project, the final project is a report that summarizes the study and identifies a recommended project, which we commonly call the recommended alternative. We hear often, just build, stop doing studies. We understand that. However, the study portion is essential. There are limited dollars for flood risk reduction, and we want to ensure that we build the right project and that we maximize the use of dollars spent. Last, we desire to, where possible, secure funding partners, and this always requires rigorous study to demonstrate and support a funding need. During the feasibility study stage, we conducted an in-depth evaluation, identified and quantified problems, developed and explored possible flood risk reduction alternatives, and ultimately recommended a preferred alternative. Our feasibility study has 3 primary objectives. 1, to investigate the flooding issues along tributaries P138-01-00 and P138-01-01 in the Greens Bayou Watershed. 2, to identify and evaluate potential flood risk reduction alternatives suitable for the project area. And last, to recommend the preferred alternative that will reduce the depth, duration, and frequency of flooding in the study area. As we begin evaluating our alternatives, we had several key considerations to keep in mind. First, we must ensure there is no adverse impact to other areas. As a no adverse impact agency, project engineers ensure that improvements made on one part of the channel will not increase flooding on another part of the channel. In other words, work performed in other places cannot increase the amount of stormwater in another area and vice versa. Second, the solution must take costs, constructability, and anticipated effectiveness into consideration. And third, the recommended alternative must work seamlessly with the Harris County Engineering Department's subdivision drainage improvement projects and other flood control district projects underway in the area. As you can see on this exhibit, projects in the area include the Mid-Reach Greens Bayou Channel Conveyance Improvement Project, the Lauder Stormwater Detention Basin Project, Castlewood Addition, Sections 3 and 4, Subdivision Drainage Improvement Project, as well as the High Meadows Subdivision Drainage Improvement Project. Throughout this presentation, we will be using terms like the 500-year and 100-year storm events. So let's go ahead and discuss what that means. Using the 100-year storm event as an example, this is a rainfall event that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. And in addition to being called a 100-year storm event, can also be referred to as a 1% annual chance event. That does not mean that if we have a 1% annual chance event today, that it will be another 100 years before it occurs again. Rather, it means that in any given year, we have a 1% chance of a 100-year storm event occurring. This is simply a measure of the expected chance of a specific rainfall event based on available historical data. We found that the majority of the study area is in the 500-year storm event FEMA floodplain. We went out after a recent rain and took photos of the tributary in various locations, as you can see here. You will also see on the exhibit that some of the study area is not at all in the FEMA floodplain. However, we do recognize that some of these areas do still have issues with flooding at times. The subdivision drainage improvement projects underway with the Harris County Engineering Department are anticipated to help reduce flooding risk in those subdivisions. The existing level of service, which is the amount of stormwater a tributary can carry before it overflows its banks, was estimated for the 2 tributaries in the study area. This existing level of service varied considerably between the 2 tributaries and within each tributary. For example, Tributary P138-01-00 varies from less than a 10-year level of service within the upper part of the tributary, while the lower part is a 500-year level of service. The study team also noted that when backwater, the stormwater that overflows from the main stem of Green's Bayou during major rainfalls, moves into these tributaries, it causes both tributaries to move to a less than 10-year level of service. A closer look into the level of service for these tributaries provided insight into the cause of existing flooding issues in the area. Based on the team's evaluation, we found that flooding sources in the area include backflow from Green's Bayou due to its limited capacity. The team identified that the backflows from the Green's Bayou were one of the main factors that caused flooding along these 2 tributaries during Hurricane Harvey and other major storm events. Insufficient level of service for the 2 tributaries, as we discussed on the previous slide, and insufficient local drainage systems, which will be addressed in part through the Harris County Engineering Department's subdivision drainage improvement project. Through our initial evaluation, we have identified several potential opportunities and constraints to accomplish our ultimate project goal. The opportunities include that our study team did not identify any significant environmental challenges or utility conflicts in the study area. This is helpful for keeping costs low and giving us options on how to design an optimal flood risk reduction project for this area. However, one constraint is that there's limited land available for constructing a stormwater detention basin or making significant channel conveyance improvements without acquiring additional land and/or structures. Our recommended alternative must make this into consideration. When we begin a feasibility study, we always pull out our flood risk reduction toolbox. In our toolbox, we have various techniques we can deploy to reduce the risk of flooding in a particular area. It is important to find the right type and right configuration for each project, which is what we do in the feasibility study stage. On this slide, you will see several of our typical tools, but tonight we will focus on the first 2 items in the toolbox. These include channel conveyance improvements and stormwater detention. Channel conveyance improvements may include widening and deepening a channel to carry more water, or improving a channel's efficiency by reducing vegetation, or both. Stormwater detention basins are designed to receive and hold above normal stormwater volumes. The water then slowly drains out of the stormwater detention basin as the water level in the channel recedes. Using our toolbox as a starting point, combined with findings on the existing conditions and why this area floods, we evaluated 4 alternatives that used a combination of channel conveyance improvements and installation of storm sewers. Ultimately, the top scoring and recommended alternative is alternative 1, which recommends channel conveyance improvements through a concrete line channel for both tributaries. To mitigate the increased stormwater flows that will come from the channel conveyance improvements, we will utilize storage volume from the Lauder's stormwater detention basin to hold the increased flows. Using the Lauder basin that is already underway also helps us solve identified constraint for this area, a lack of available land for constructing a stormwater detention basin. I want to note that this project alone will not resolve flooding issues in the area. There are a multitude of factors that go into flood risk reduction, including both main stem and localized flooding, but this project will help reduce that risk. Now, what are our next steps in the project lifecycle? Our next steps are to receive input from area residents and stakeholders, which is the reason we're here tonight. And then we will finalize the feasibility study and recommend flood risk reduction alternative. Throughout the project's lifecycle, since all of the area projects work together to reduce the risk of flooding, we will continue to coordinate with Precinct 2 and the Harris County Engineering Department on their area's subdivision drainage improvement projects. And finally, we will begin the preliminary engineering stage. At this time, we do not know the exact timing for the beginning of the next stage. Once the recommended alternative is finalized and the timing for preliminary engineering is defined, we will follow up with the community as updates are available. I'll now turn the program back over to Sparkle to kick off the Q&A.
Thanks, Dina. Before we move into the Q&A, I want to share a quick reminder that we'd love to hear from you on this and other projects moving forward across Harris County. To learn more about this project, to ask questions, or to sign up for our mailing list, please visit hcfcd.org/C43. Again, that's hcfcd.org/C43. As a reminder, there are 3 ways to submit a comment about this project during tonight's session. You can submit a comment on the site in the box near the presentation live stream. You can submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website at hcfcd.org/C43, or you can submit a comment via phone at 855-925-2801 using the meeting code 9574. If you're joining us via phone tonight, please press *6 to leave a message. Additionally, I want to reiterate that questions not addressed during tonight's Q&A will receive a response from the Flood Control District following the close of the public comment period. Information from this meeting and a recording of the live stream will be available on the Flood Control District's website and YouTube channel. Joining Dina for our Q&A session tonight are Gary Bezemek and Jean Chen, who are overseeing the feasibility study. Now it's time to take some of your questions. And our first question is for you, Gary. Why is flooding such a frequent issue in my neighborhood?
Yeah, there's a general response to the question, and then there's more specific. In general, we talked about during the presentation that all of Harris County is flood prone, and there's 3 primary reasons that this area, when I say area, it's the entire county, is flood prone. Is one, we live in an area that experiences frequent and intense rainfall, and we get large scale events that come from tropical storms and hurricanes. And then year round, we'll just get those large events that occur, non-hurricane, non-tropical storm that can occur pretty much anytime during the year. So we live in a geographic area that experiences a lot of rainfall. But then 2, we talked about earlier that the soils in Harris County predominantly are clay type soils that don't absorb a lot of water. So when we get this rainfall that occurs very frequently, it tends to run off very quickly. The third component from a regional perspective is that our area is very flat. And so there's not a lot of topography. So when we get these large rain events, whether they be several inches in a short amount of time, 5, 6, 7 inches in a couple of hours, or they be, 16, 17 inches over a day, what tends to happen is that water begins to pond up, it starts to flood streets, and then ultimately it tries to make its way, downhill to the bayous. And because we're so flat, typically that sheet flow, that movement of water is going to go through neighborhoods to try to get out of the neighborhoods, and that can create flooding. So from a regional perspective, that's what's going on. In addition to that, it's just a lot of our infrastructure is older. It was built years ago, and it wasn't sized for various reasons for the amount of rainfall that we now understand that we get on a regular basis. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and that's why we do these feasibility studies, so that we can look at specific areas, identify what the problems are, and then try to come up with realistic opportunities through construction projects to try to alleviate flooding.
All right, thank you so much. Our next question is for you, Jean. What was the goal of the feasibility study?
Thanks for the question. The goal, the overarching goal of the feasibility study is to identify a flood risk reduction project that will reduce the depth, duration, and frequency of flooding in the area of the Greens Bayou tributaries P138-01-00 and P138-01-01.
All right. And Dina, this is a question we get quite often. Can you explain how this study was funded?
Sure. The study was funded with the 2018 bond funds that we discussed earlier in the program. There you go. Yeah, this was one of the projects that was included in this list of projects for the program that would be funded through bond funding.
All right. Jean, would you share when any construction would start?
Yes, there's currently not a time frame for construction for this project. The next step for this project is to move into a preliminary engineering stage. And then after that will be design. And so typically this will be, under a normal time frame, it would be at least 2 years later. And depending on funding of the project, and it could be longer.
All right, Gary, our next question is for you. Is the Flood Control District partnering with anyone on this project? And will any trails or other recreational amenities be constructed as part of the project?
Yes, Sparkle, thank you for that question. I'd like to answer a couple of different pieces to it. First and foremost, the Flood Control District does not expend our capital funds on trails or recreational amenities. But what we try to do is find a sponsor, an agency, city, MUD, any governmental entity that is willing to fund those particular pieces. So if a trail is of interest or recreational amenities, typically we try to partner with an agency and then we design our infrastructure so that somebody can easily come in and lay the groundwork, to put the amenities in. So at this time on this project, where we're at in feasibility, we're really focused right now on trying to identify, which is what we've just completed, is the feasibility study, where we try to figure out what the problems are in the watershed that we're studying or in the area that we're studying. We then try to figure out, okay, what alternatives, what can we do? How much would those require in terms of funding and time? And then once we have a better idea of what works out here, then we try through the process of going to the PER, doing more detailed analysis to get ready for design plans. During that process is when we start looking for partners to see if there's interest and somebody that is looking to try to put these recreational amenities. So at this point in time, we do not have a partner for this project. But as the project progresses, we will continue to look for such. And then if we find them, those components would be kind of wrapped up into our design.
All right, thank you. At this point, I want to remind everyone that there are 3 ways you can submit a comment about this project during tonight's session. You can submit a comment on this site in the box near the presentation live stream. You can submit a comment on the district's website at hcfcd.org/C-43. And if you're joining us via phone tonight, press *6 to leave a message. I see quite a few of you have joined us via phone, and we appreciate that, and we encourage you to ask a question as well. All right, we'll dive right back into the questions we have. And the next one is for you, Dina. How does this project fit into the overall 2018 bond program?
Sure. Well, as mentioned earlier, the Flood Control District's mission is to provide flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. And with that said, this project is one of those 181 projects that had been identified as one of the many projects to be funded and sponsored by our 2018 bond program to implement improvements to historically flooded homes and communities.
All right, thank you. Dina, our next question is this project part of a larger effort in the watershed?
Okay, sure. So we talked about a little bit earlier that there are several ongoing projects in the watershed. And we are evaluating all of them individually as well as in concert with each other. So while we're out tonight talking to you about this specific project on its own, there are several other projects. As you can see on this map, we've got them showing up in the Greens Bayou watershed, both in the red and orange dots. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about all of those various projects and see which ones are located maybe in other areas of the watershed that you frequent or are interested in, please go over to the Flood Control District's website. I know Sparkle just reiterated it for you. I believe we have that on a presentation slide we can share as well. But you can find a lot of information about the various projects on our website. And while the meeting tonight, again, it does specifically focus on P138-01-00 and P38-01-01. We do have many other projects in the Greens Bayou watershed.
Yes, our website has a wealth of information. We encourage each of you to go out and take a look at our website. Inevitably, there is information specific to your neighborhood, your community, and your area. All right, our next question is for you, Gary. You talked about another project, the Midreach Greens Bayou Channel Conveyance Improvements Project. Will that project help reduce the risk of flooding in our area?
Yes, what we're talking about is the Midreach project. I want to kind of highlight how that's different than the study that we just did. So right now, the study that we're focusing on is the P138-01-01 channel project. And we touched on this earlier, but the flood risk for the homes that are associated in this drainage area, there's multiple flood risks that are occurring out here. The first one is if you look on the graphic, if you can see the graphic that's on the screen, when we get a large rain event in the upper part of Greens Bayou, all of that runoff for, I don't know, maybe 100 square miles, somewhere on that order of magnitude, all that runoff tries to make its way to the Greens Bayou main stem and then flows all the way through by this neighborhood here and goes all the way down to the ship channel. So when we have a large event, such as we touched on Hurricane Harvey, Tropical Storm Allison, when those large events occur, the amount of floodplain water getting out of banks along Greens Bayou is sufficient that it can actually back water up and flood this area. So that impact of flooding is what is being looked at as part of the Midreach project. So the Midreach is focusing on Greens Bayou and trying to create additional capacity in conjunction with detention to try to reduce the flooding elevations along the main stem of Greens Bayou. So this local area benefits by any reductions that Midreach project puts out is going to reduce the amount of water that is going to back up and flood up into this area. It'll reduce the floodplain. So there will be a direct impact or benefit when that project is constructed. But in addition to that, if we just get a large rain event and it falls over this drainage area, but it doesn't rain in the upper part of Greens, there's still a flooding potential because the channels that we are studying, the P138-01-00 and the P138-01-01, are not big enough to carry the local flows that would come. So when you add that to necessary neighborhood improvements, which is what the Harris County Engineering Department is looking at, when you put it all together is where you get the most benefit. So the original question was, will this area benefit from the Greens Bayou Midreach project? The answer to that is for every reduction, for all the reductions that they're proposing, there will be benefits to this area, but that's not the entire need out here. The other need is to move forward with the subdivision projects that are currently being looked at, as well as to move forward with the project along the local channel here.
All right, thank you, Gary. Jing, our next question is for you. Why is the Flood Control District recommending the use of a concrete line channel in this specific area?
Yes, the concrete line channel can carry flows more efficiently, and they can, and once they do that, a lot of times they can generate some downstream impact. And in order to mitigate that, for this project, we're planning to use the Lauder Stormwater Detention Basin to mitigate any increased flow. But concrete lined channels are usually designed to pass through more water in order to increase the level of service for the channel.
All right, thank you. Dina, we have a question about how residents can report channel maintenance concerns.
Okay, sure. We'd like to have the resident actually call in and log a complaint with us. That phone number is 346-286-4000. Again, please go ahead and call in. We'll take a record of it, and then we'll make sure that it gets sent to the appropriate staff in our maintenance department so that they can go ahead and address the concern and take a look at it and figure out who needs to be involved in helping to address the situation.
All right, thank you. Jing, I believe there are some Harris County Engineering Division, subdivision projects in the area. Can you share a little more about projects that might be in the area?
Yes, I'm closely coordinating with a couple of subdivision projects that are managed by the Harris County Engineering Department. One of them is Castlewood subdivision. The other one is High Meadows and Fairgreens subdivision. And as far as I know, the Castlewood project has a completed design and going to be going into construction soon. And the High Meadow Fairgreens project is still currently in the design.
All right, thank you. Gary, this next question is for you. Can you all stop the new development going on across the street from my neighborhood?
I'll just answer this in general because I'm not familiar with what the specific new construction is, but there's two kind of answers to that. For starters, flood control, we do not have any authority over development. So our jurisdiction is to study the Bayou system and to try to work with local partners or state and federal partners to try to do enhancements. However, all new development is required to follow very strict development criteria. And so depending on the size, if it's, somebody putting up a structure in their backyard, or if it's a subdivision, there's different levels of development criteria. And the permit offices, whether it be through the city or through the county, if it's an unincorporated, are the ones that would be best directed to. But as long as everything is done properly through the permit process, then typically projects that are being constructed are not going to result in any significant impact, to drainage to the level that we're talking about.
All right, thank you. And this next question is, what other opportunities will there be for public input on these projects? We do participate in public engagement opportunities at every life cycle stage of our projects, whether that's preliminary engineering, design, construction. So we talk to you throughout every single step and stage of that process. We encourage you to sign up for email alerts on our project, and we will keep you posted. If you sign up to receive those email alerts, you'll also be notified of any meetings happening in regards to projects in your area. So again, our website is a great resource for that kind of information, and we encourage you to sign up for it. Now, we did have a more specific question from Philip about meeting in his particular area. We are still following COVID protocols. And so we are not holding in-person meetings at this time. However, we will follow up with every individual that provides a question or comment after the meeting if we don't address your specific. But I did want to let you know we see you and we appreciate you for being here tonight. All right, our next question is for Gary. You talked about other projects in Greens Bayou. How do I learn more? And Gary, before you start, I'm going to say the website again. The website's a great resource. But Gary, I'll let you say more.
Well, if we can, is this the website, right? Yes. This is a graphic that kind of shows some of the different projects. These are going to range from large scale to probably small cleanouts and rehabs and those type of projects. But our website is a good resource because it's going to give you an idea of what these projects are. You can drill down However, if you have comments or questions, if there's something that you don't understand or you need more information, you can always just send in your information as a comment and say, I would like to speak to somebody and ask some more detailed questions. And then it'll take a little while for that to process through the system, but we have different staff people that, depending on the question can be directed to them and they can get back to you. And that's probably the best way to go, so that, you know, you can kind of see what information is there, follow up if you have any questions or you would like some additional feedback, and then we can make sure that question gets to the appropriate person to answer your question.
All right, thank you. Dina, are you able to explain the storm frequencies again?
Sure. We might want to go back. There we go, back to that slide. So we talked a lot tonight about the 1% annual chance event, or that 100-year storm event, and the 500-year storm event, or that 0.2% annual chance event. And really what that means is exactly like I'm explaining it. It's that annual chance event in any given year. So if, for instance, we say we had the 100-year or that 1% annual chance storm come through an area, doesn't necessarily mean that it will be another 100 years before we get that type of rainfall again. It just simply means that statistically, what are your chances of having that amount of rainfall within a given year? So I hope that helps clear up some of the confusion about it.
All right, thank you. Jean, would you take this one? Why do stormwater detention basins need to be paired with channel conveyance improvements?
So as I mentioned earlier about the concrete line channels, where the channel is increased in its capacity to carry water. And when that happens, usually there's more flow that goes downstreams, and we don't want that. Harris County is a no adverse impact community, meaning whatever project improvements we do will not negatively impact those downstreams. So in order to hold back that water, usually it comes in the form of a mitigation detention or stormwater detention basin. Oftentimes the detention basins can also, stormwater detention basin can also serve to lower water surface elevation in a channel or in a receiving stream.
All right. Dina, would you talk about the existing conditions once more, again, on slide 21, and then the recommended alternative?
Sure. So yeah, this slide, it shows the channels that we're here to discuss tonight, sort of in that red or maroon color going up right through the middle of the exhibit that you can see, P138-0100 and P38-0100. So what all the blue and green shading you can see around those channels is actually the floodplain, or that estimated area of inundation when Green's Bayou comes up high, spills over its banks and backs into the neighborhood. And as we discussed a little bit earlier in the presentation tonight, there are a few sources of flood risks within the area. One would be from Green's Bayou, as you can see demonstrated in this exhibit, but the other one is simply the capacity, or how much water those channels that we're here to talk about tonight can hold. And then the third source is from those systems up within the neighborhoods, what we'll oftentimes call the local drainage system. So that's typically made up of things like storm sewer systems or roadside ditches that you'll see out in front of your house next to the roadway, and that carry the water away from your home and your property into that flood control channel. So if we want to go to slide 27, that's where we show the improvements that we're recommending for this project. I'll say the conveyance improvements. So what we'd like to do to be able to capture more of that water and hold it within the channel banks is to go ahead and widen the channel and concrete line it. You can see we've got a couple of cross sections up here, and we've illustrated where we'd like to see those improvements go. We've got them color coded there. So that lower end of P138-0100, you can see that we'd be looking to kind of widen it a little bit at the bottom, and then again, change that channel lining. And then as we move up the tributary, you'll see we've got another channel there, P138-01-00 in green. You'll see it's a fairly narrow improvement, but with that lining, it will be able to help carry more water out of that nearby neighborhood and into P138-01-00. And then lastly, at the upper reach of P138-01-01, you can see that last cross section and sort of that red and magenta color at the bottom of the screen. Shows you again where we're widening the channel out along the bottom and then also along the embankment as well. Now, these are just the proposed improvements right now that we're recommending. And again, as we mentioned earlier, we are a no adverse impact community. So while we're looking to enlarge the size of that channel a bit and put in the concrete lining so that the channel can move water out of the neighborhoods more quickly, we will be looking to take that water that we're moving out of the neighborhoods and storing it in the water stormwater detention basin. That way we're making sure that we're not taking water out of these subdivisions and moving it onto your neighbors downstream. We definitely don't want to exacerbate flooding anywhere else. We'll be trying to move the water, helping to move the water out of the neighborhoods, and then safely storing it in a stormwater detention basin until Greens Bayou goes down and has more capacity to accept water out of that stormwater detention basin.
All right, thank you. And we did have a question come in from May Wyatt. Unfortunately, we were unable to understand your voice message. So May Wyatt, if you're listening in on the phone call, we encourage you to call back and leave a voice message once more. And if we don't get to your question before the end of tonight's meeting, we will follow up with a response. Thank you for being here. All right, Gary, I think this will be our last question of the night. Can you explain the jurisdictions again?
Sure. I'll start with flood control. That's who we are representing here. The Harris County Flood Control District is a special purpose district. We talked about this at the beginning of the presentation, but we're a special purpose district that was created by the state of Texas and given jurisdiction over the open channel network in Harris County. Prior to us being created, there were a lot of individual drainage districts or cities that were trying to take care of drainage. And so if a development created a drainage district, they might have a mile of channel, but all they would want to do is take care of that mile. And then as soon as they were out of their boundary, it would move into either a different drainage district or an area that nobody was taking care of. And so because of the way that was going, the state created the Harris County Flood Control District and gave us the jurisdiction to have one entity that it's our jurisdiction to look at all the channel network and try to look at the county as a holistic, to say, okay, where do we need to do projects and be given certain authority to be able to do our projects. So we primarily have jurisdiction on open channels throughout the county. There are some private channels in Harris County. Our jurisdiction comes in. We have certain state given authority in terms of what we can do in an open channel. But if we don't have any channel right away, we're very limited in what we're able to do. So we're able to go in and walk into a channel and remove debris and blockages from any open system, but we're not able to do any kind of infrastructure projects without owning the property, either through fee or easement. And so our jurisdiction is pretty easy in terms of, if we're looking at this graphic, is the open channel network. Now, the neighborhood drainage, the storm sewers, the roadside ditches, as Dina mentioned earlier, all of those are going to be at the jurisdiction of the entity that they fall under. So in an unincorporated Harris County, typically, with some exceptions, Harris County, the precincts are going to have jurisdiction over those systems. If the area is within a city of Houston or other city, there's multiple cities within Harris County, they typically would have jurisdiction over those. So whoever generally maintains the roads in an area are going to be the entity that picks up the drainage. That's in general. There's always going to be, caveats to that. And so in the case of detention basins, oftentimes detention is going to be a shared jurisdiction. Oftentimes we build detention to try to alleviate pressure on our open channel network, but detention can also be built by the neighborhoods to have an outfall point for the new development And so oftentimes we work with those jurisdictions because, there's always a need for us to spill some of the water into those basins, as well as for them to drain out of the neighborhood into them. So oftentimes those are shared jurisdictions, and those jurisdictions really come in based on legal agreements on, who's going to maintain this facility and, who's the ultimate responsible and who pays for what. So when it's shared, it's kind of a mixture, and it really kind of depends. So when we talk about this project, we have jurisdiction over the open channel network. In this particular case, it's the P138-01 or 01-00 and P138-01-01. So our primary goal out here is to see what can we do to improve that. But as we work on it, we're also being very aware of if more water were to be brought to the channel as improvements to the local drainage network, the storm sewers, roadside ditches, if improvements were done, what would that do to the system that we're looking at? So we try to work together to try to figure out ultimately what needs to be done out here. And then if the project that we come up with requires work to be done outside of our jurisdiction, that's where we try to find partners. We then go approach the different entities that would have jurisdiction over those systems to see if they want to work with us so that we can build something that ultimately our goal is provides, flood damage benefits for, the study areas that we're looking at. And it's really difficult with drainage because, while there's multiple jurisdictions, water, we've kind of said it a lot, gets said a lot in our office, but water doesn't really know, political jurisdictions. When it rains, water is going to go from high elevations to low elevations. It's going to go over land. It's going to fill the streets. And so really the drainage network that we're talking about is, pretty much from the water hitting your yard all the way down to Galveston Bay. So, the projects that we try to do, and that's why we talked about earlier, was that in these feasibility studies, we try to start out by not considering whose jurisdiction is out there. We try to start by saying, okay, let's really study and analyze what is going on in this area, whatever the study area is. We try to look at what happens when a large rain event occurs, where does the water go, what happens to the bayou networks, what happens to the storm sewers, the roadside ditches. And we run a series of models and computer simulations to help us try to figure out what the issues are. And then once we know what the issues are, then we try to lay out, okay, what can be done to improve it. We simulate those improvements. We go through a series of steps to figure out what the most recommended is. And then, like I said, if there's a significant amount of work that needs to happen outside of our jurisdiction, we then try to go find those partners, to say, let's work together to try to build something that can benefit the area. So that's the short answer.
All right, Gary, thank you for your very short answer. All right, and with that, I would like to share one final reminder that we are continuing to accept comments and feedback on this project through December 15th. We also encourage everyone to get flood insurance as flood season in Harris County runs year-round. Thank you again for joining us this evening and for your engagement with the project. We look forward to continuing to share updates as our work moves forward. Stay safe and have a